In Between the Whistles. I'm your host, Joe Chap, and today we're having a special segment that I'm going to keep going with. It's going to probably be one to two twice a week where we do go in depth with Joe Chap. In this segment, you're going to get in depth analysis on certain topics. It could be Michigan, it could be Michigan State, the Detroit Lions, the Pistons, Red Wings, Tigers. We're going to give you it all. So if you're new to the channel, subscribe because I really appreciate everyone subscribing to the channel. I've been trying to build my content and get better at my content. I started this a year ago. I'm looking to get better, and I wasn't doing it last football season, so I'm really anxious to do it this football season. So if you're new to the channel, subscribe. We're gonna have great content. So this is about the Detroit Lions secondary. You probably read the title, you probably seen the thumbnail, and you're like, what is he saying with this could be a hidden elite unit? Now, before we get started, obviously you know that I do a Detroit Lions news podcast. So I was doing research on the Detroit Lions. I was doing research on what they're missing, how much they got back, and what they have now. So we're going to get to that right now. So look at this. The Lions made moves in the offseason. They signed Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They signed Emmanuel Moseley, signed Cameron Sutton. They drafted Brian Branch. The interesting thing about Emmanuel Moseley is he might not start the year. But when you look at his stats that I'm going to show you later, you're going to be like, wow, this guy is actually pretty damn good, and this could be a steal. But you're going to look at another guy that Detroit Lions have on their roster right now, and they had last season, who is vastly underrated. They also drafted Brian Branch, and Brian Branch is I don't know how he lasted to the second round, if we're going to be honest with each other, because if you heard all the people talking about, Jack Campbell was an overreach for the Detroit Lions. Well, if you just swap Jack Campbell and Brian Branch, you basically get everyone's mock drafts they had. So when you have guys come into the situation like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, like Emmanuel Moseley, like Cameron Sutton and Brian Branch, you have to let players go. And they let go of Jeff Okudah, they let go of Mike Hughes, they let go of Deshaun Elliott, and they let go of Amani Oruwariye. And when you look at those players, you're like, wow, they're really not missing much. They got better in certain positions, and they got better with the four players they added compared to the four players they got rid of. The little bit of disappointment with Jeff Okudah, obviously he was a first round pick. You were expecting more from Jeff Okudah. And listen, I don't think we realized how good he was last year in terms of his completion percentage against, because when we get to that, Deshaun Elliott was number one as being the worst, 31 for 38, 81.6%. Mike Hughes was the second worst at 73.2%. You had Will Harris, you had Alex Anzalone, Amani Oruwariye. That's a little bit lower than I expected. But if he would have got the playing time that he got early in the season, I bet you that he'd be right up there with Deshaun Elliott and Mike Hughes. Kirby Joseph, 62.5. He played half the season, so those stats might be a little bit skewed. But Jeff Okudah right there at 59.7. I don't think I expect. I don't think I expected him at all to be at 59.7 completion percentage against, and he got the most targets on the team with a minimum of 30 targets. Obviously, Jerry Jacobs right there. That's the most underrated player on this roster right now, because a lot of people, they don't look at Jerry Jacobs and they don't look at him like, oh, that's a good player. They look at him as like, oh, we got him as an undrafted free agent. He's pretty decent, but guys like Emmanuel Moseley, guys like Cameron Sutton, they're gonna they're gonna unseat him, and he's gonna be just a has been. If you look back at these stats, he's not going to be just a has been. That completion percentage against, I think, is going to get a lot better, especially with Cameron Sutton in the role, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in the secondary. They got a little bit better. Now, when we talk about corners, we talk about secondary players. One of the biggest things that you could do as a secondary player is not allowing yak yardage. Here's what the 5 worst yak allowed. So, Jeff Okudah 270. That's absolutely abysmal. You don't like to see that. And that's probably the reason that Jeff Okudah really didn't last in Detroit, because yards after the catch are huge. Because if you're able to tackle after the catch, you're able to tackle a guy after he catches the ball and makes a move, that could be the difference between a touchdown, a first down, or uh, it could be a touchdown, a first down, or maybe just a 2nd and 5. Mike Hughes, 197 yards. Again, we see Mike Hughes, if you go back to the completion percentage against, he was 73.2%, and then he's allowing 197s off yak yardage. There's really nothing he is doing well for the Detroit Lions. Alex Anzalone, 189 yards. We all know about Alex Anzalone. He's a good leader. He misses a lot of tackles. This is obvious right here with the worst yak allowed. Will Harris, 175 yards. Will Harris got picked on a lot. I think that, one game alone really stood out when it was that 60-yard catch from Stefon Diggs to win the game for Buffalo. That was against Will Harris, and that's exactly what went against his repertoire. Malcolm Rodriguez, 169 yards. We talk about Malcolm Rodriguez this year. He might not start this year, and this is probably a major reason why the yak yardage allowed. Obviously, if you're a linebacker, you're expected to make the tackle, and if you're not making the tackle and you're allowing a player to get free, again, it's a difference between a first down and it's a difference between a first down and a second and like 7. So that's key. But look, you look at those stats and you go, so Joe, why is this a hidden elite unit? So let's keep going on the stats. So quarterback rating against Mike Hughes, again, the worst. Deshaun Elliott, again, the worst. Amani Oruwariye, this is where he chimes in. 106. Will Harris, 106 on the dot. Jeff Okudah, 87.6. The guys at the bottom 3, they're still on this roster. The 4 guys, there's 4 guys up top that are not on the roster anymore. Will Harris is still on the roster, but Will Harris adds a dynamic to the team that, the coaches trust him mainly on special teams. If he's a guy who's your depth cornerback, it really doesn't hurt that much. Now you're probably asking, who was the best against yards after the catch? I'm glad you asked, because that's what we're going to get into next. The 4 best yak allowed with a minimum of 30 targets were Kerby Joseph at 81 yards, Amani Oruwariye at 108. I imagine if he got more playing time down the stretch, he probably would have been just as bad. And Deshaun Elliott, he missed a couple games too, so this would have been bad too, it being that he was getting just dominated by completion percentage. But Jerry Jacobs and Kerby Joseph, you look at and you go, they are legit players. That's what I'm talking about with this Detroit Lions team, because a lot of people don't understand how good Jerry Jacobs was last year, and you don't understand how good Jerry Jacobs could be moving forward. So the Detroit Lions, that's what you're looking at when you look at Jerry Jacobs. You look at Kerby Joseph. Kerby Joseph going into year 2, he has the potential to be an absolute stud at the safety position. And with the players that they added, you can't even argue. So they added Cameron Sutton to 3 interceptions last year, a completion percentage against of 47.9, which would have been the best on the team. Yak yardage allowed 118. I love the 118. So they're keeping people. They're after the catch. They're tackling them. They're making the plays, and they're not allowing them to get supreme yardage. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, 6 interceptions, completion percentage of 73.1%. Yak allowed 123. Now, when you look at the completion percentage against for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, take in mind that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is an elite playmaker. Okay, so he will take chances at some balls, and it will end up into the player, the wide receiver's hands. But he also gets 6 interceptions, so you don't even worry about that. Yak yards allowed. Again, he's making the tackle. I love players that are staying within that 125-yard yak allowed, because that means that you're not allowing a lot of players to get open, to make the plays necessary. And like I said, if you tackle the player after he makes the catch, it's a difference between a third down and a touchdown, a third down and a first down. That's what matters. Now, Emmanuel Moseley, you're going to see this at the bottom. This is 2021 stats because he was hurt last year. So I wanted to get a complete comprehensive view. He hasn't stayed healthy most of his career. He hasn't played a full season. But you look at him, 1 interception, completion percentage against 56.4, and yak yardage allowed 118. Again, he's making the plays after the catch, and you love to see that. Now, you see all that, and you're like, man, this Detroit Lions team could be a pretty damn good team. And I'm telling you, when I was doing the stats, because I was looking at this for Detroit Lions News podcast, I was like, look, we know that Detroit has a good elite. They have good players in that secondary. But just how good do they have? So the better talent is there. They add, you have Cameron Sutton, you have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, you have Emmanuel Moseley, Jerry Jacobs, Tracy Walker, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch. Potentially, if you look at this list right here, you have three potential. No, yeah, you have four potential starters at safety. You have three potential starters at cornerback. And you look at that and you're like, wow, like that is better. Because if you look back on it, when you go to the players that they let go, Jeff Okudah, Mike Hughes, Deshaun Elliott, Amani Aware, just how good did the Detroit Lions get? When you look at the Detroit Lions, like I was looking at it from a pragmatic approach, I was like, okay, how many teams have four safeties? How many teams have players that could start there's four safeties deep, either way. And there wasn't many in the NFL. And when you look at adding Cameron Sutton, when you look at Jerry Jacobs and the way that he played last year, look at this. I'm going to go back to it again. Not the other one, but right here, Jerry Jacobs, 70% in quarterback rating against. Look at the yak yardage. I mean, he's 121. He's just in that frame with a lot of guys. Completion percentage against at the bottom. He's one of the best in on the Detroit Lions. When you look at all that, and then you look at the players that they added, completion percentage against is really good for Cameron Sutton. You're going to add him to the rotation with his yak yardage allowed. He's making the tackles necessary. You look at Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, 6 interceptions. Those interceptions can change the game. Okay, his yak yardage allowed isn't much more than Cameron Sutton or Emmanuel Moseley. It's probably about 5 more. So overall, when we look at the Detroit Lions, you go, are they a better team today than they were last year? Absolutely they are. Absolutely they are. But when you talk about it from a pragmatic approach, you got better on the defensive backfield more than you could have ever imagined. You could ever imagined. You look at that backfield and you go, wow, they really did get better in the secondary. They did add elite talent to the secondary. And when you go to the better talent category, the talent is better. You added these guys to your team and they're going to make you a better team. So when I say they're an elite unit, when you look at secondaries across the league, it's very hard to find four safeties that could start at their position, okay? It's very hard to see three starting cornerbacks, and then you add in the fact that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Brian Branch are both guys that could play in the slot. It gives Aaron Glenn a lot to look forward to. And as Aaron Glenn is a guy who was a defensive back, he knows just what he can do with these guys to make them better. So do I think the Detroit Lions defensive backfield is an elite unit? Absolutely. Because when you look at that backfield and you go look at throughout the NFL, go look through the NFL. Tell me a team right now, that has four safeties that could start. You can't. You can't tell me four safeties that could start. You can't tell me a team that got better in the secondary. And then you add in the fact that the depth at defensive end for the Detroit Lions is so deep that they're going to be able to put James Houston in there, who got a bunch of sacks last year. Aiden Hutchinson going into a second year. When you have a pass rush and you have guys in the backfield who can potentially make game-changing plays, make the tackles that are necessary, you're going to be in a good spot. And when I look at the secondary, they don't have to be shut down. They have to be players that make game-changing plays, whether it's a tackle, whether it's an interception, whether it's just covering your wide receiver like Cameron Sutton does with his 47.9% completion percentage against, whether it's Chauncey Gardner-Johnson making those 6 interceptions, whether it's Brian Branch making a key play with the slot cornerback, blowing up a screen pass. That's what makes you better. And you can talk about it all day long. You can talk about the Detroit Lions and the defensive backfield. They did get better. And when we go back and we look at the moves that they made, again, are you going to miss those 4 players at the bottom? You're absolutely not going to miss them, because the players that you added at the top with Brian Branch, Johnson, and Moseley and Sutton, you're a better team because of that. So if you enjoyed the video, we're going to go with more videos. Obviously, this one was kind of a shorter video today, But if you're new to the channel, subscribe. If you like the video, comment below and tell me what you think about this video. And tell me, do you think the Detroit Lions defensive backfield is an elite unit? Because I'm really interested to hear your guys' take on the situation. We will see you in the next video of In Depth with Joe Chap, and I will see you guys in the next video.